Welcome back to the Armchair Attorney podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Leffler, a real-life lawyer and an adjunct law professor, coming to you live. This is a special day. Not only is it Friday, but this is the first time the one and only Freight Alley will be joining the program live all across the interweb. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining us. And if you're listening to this, you're going to have a good time. I have found myself enamored with Mr. Fuller. He is one of the most dynamic and interesting people in the supply chain. You probably know that. That's why it's what we call in the media business a get. Now, before I can have Craig come on, he will be here momentarily, I have to do the little advertising thing. This is all possible because of you, the listeners and viewers who tune in and watch what we put together, listen to me scream about the law and regulation or whatever else might be on my mind. But I have to thank my friends over at DAT, right there, Dial a Truck. Since 1978, DAT has been helping people discover loads all across this great country. Whether you're a broker or a motor carrier or a shipper, there's things that DAT's working on. They've been doing some pretty interesting things. You've probably seen they bought Outgo, they bought Convoy Platform, they bought Trucker Tools, all of this in order to keep the connected supply chain moving. And of course, my good friend Ryan Joyce at Genlog, setting a new standard of care for freight technology, cameras all across the supply chain, watching for that trailer or that truck. Are you sourcing capacity? Are you trying to find that missing load? Well, Ryan Joyce and his team have the data. They have the cameras. You should check that out. Now that part is all done. Listen, I had my first chance to be on the main stage at F3 with Craig Fuller, and we had a chance to dive into a whole myriad of topics. And what I love about Craig is this: we don't have to do a lot of prep. We just improvise. We see what's happening. And so you will get to meet my good friend, Craig Fuller, absolutely right now. Craig, how are you?
Matt, I'm incredible to be here. I got to ask, how do I get one of those Genlogs cameras back there? Are you sure it's not on? Because
I've asked Ryan specifically, does it record? And he said no. So
he is a CIA agent or former CIA agent. So I don't know that I would trust that.
I can get you, and I think I could put a good word in for you if you're looking for.
If you know him, that would be awesome. But
I'll send them a text when we're done.
I'm worried though that it might film me. Are you sure it's not a device to spy?
We're being spied on every single waking moment. We have devices that we never leave that are always talking to their corporate mothership. So I think we're part of the surveillance state at this point.
I think we are. We contribute into it, especially like doing these podcasts and putting our opinions out in public.
I'm just hoping that I do this long enough, the AI can make a version of me that will allow me to survive my own mortality. That's what I'm banking on.
So when the Serbian truck driver overseas, the strong solo Sergey says, "Hey, I'm Matt Leffler. I need you to pick up this load. It's not a double broker. I promise." That's what's going to happen.
I suspect any broker that hears me telling them I'm a truck driver, they will know immediately not to book that freight with me. I think they would know.
The AI can improve upon your trucking knowledge. You have a trucking background, so I wouldn't be so dismissive.
Well, I have a background in it, but nothing really skill oriented. Like I've driven a switch tractor. That's about the extent. I've driven a forklift. I got the training, so I have that, but I would not trust me with a CDL.
Have you ever gone in the maintenance shop and did you ever get your hands dirty in it?
I would help technicians on the initial paperwork of the trucks coming in. So writing down, before we had the QR codes, writing down the unit number, writing down the VIN so that we could put that into our TMT system, because we had the old green screen Transman from TMW.
Oh, amazing. It's good. It's good. I did get my hands dirty every now and then, working in the shop and cleaning the trucks out. I could never work on the trucks. No one would trust me with that. But
I can help someone buck rivets. That's the extent. Or change
cleaning the trucks out after the driver had lived in there. That was a job that I don't recommend on anyone.
I think one of the most difficult jobs in this business is doing lease turn-in repairs for truckers. So you get this owner operator who lost his lease or wants to do something different, and you have to clean out the truck they've been living in. That can be a bit dicey.
I think generally living in the truck does not afford itself to the highest quality of life for a lot of drivers. That's the unfortunate thing.
It's a tough business.
People who have ever taken, have booted a tenant out of an apartment or a house would know, or foreclosed homes. Back in 2008, I was looking for a house, and I remember touring these foreclosed homes. And man, people do some crazy stuff to these houses. They get really angry and they like literally take the kitchen sink. They
Oh,
put
absolutely.
concrete in the toilet. Like, you're just like, dude, like,
In a past life, I used to do foreclosures of mechanics liens. So, like when you do work on a property, the construction workers have liens, and you could foreclose lien, you could evict people that way. And you're right, it is a brutal, brutal business. I was doing that in 2010 and 2011. So we were just at the end of the big housing crisis, kind of falling apart. It was a good time. It was an interesting time.
By the way, I got to tell your audience a trick. So I learned this. So I was in the payments business, and we did basically money distribution on behalf of banks. We had debit cards, and we would issue them on behalf of banks. And Bank of America, former Countrywide, the largest mortgage bank-owned originator in the world, and they had filed bankruptcy. And anyways, BofA owned it. And what they were trying to do is get people to voluntarily leave the homes that they were renting.
Cash for keys.
What I learned is that if you ever end up in a foreclosure situation, a bit of a hint for anyone who ever has this problem, go find a renter to rent from you, because rent law supersedes foreclosure law. And so Bank of America was writing $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 checks to get people to leave the homes. And so it's a trick, get someone who's not you because if you live there, they can foreclose on you. But if it's someone else, you could maybe make some money that way.
Now, let me just be very clear for the audience. Don't take legal advice from a podcast. If you think you need a lawyer, you probably do. It's not
I'm going to get someone to say I'm teaching people how to scam. But hey, this is trucking. There's a lot of scams going around. This one
we are all trying to survive in the transportation industry. So what is happening in the freight market? Is it everything better now? Everything's fixed?
Like, it's all relative, right? I think certainly we are seeing much higher tender rejections. And for those that don't follow what a tender rejection is, it's basically a motor carrier telling a shipper that they are turning down a load. Usually we're in the contract market. These tenders come over in some electronic form, an EDI or an API. And basically the rate has already been agreed to, but that tender, if they reject it, it says that carrier has better things to do with their trucks. And so when we see tender rejections go up, it is communicating to us that motor carriers are gaining better optionality and likely better pricing with their trucks. And so we want to see higher tender rejections.
That's right.
And we're certainly seeing that. Now, it's a very similar. I used to, when we first launched tender rejections, I used to get flagged by all the social media platforms for dating scams. And it works a lot like that. Tender rejections is what they thought. It was like, no, it's not a tender rejection.
And not Tinder rejections. We're not swiping left.
It works the same way. Think about this. If you're a highly desirable male or female, when conditions are good, you're going to reject more prospects.
That's
and
right.
So, you go to a place and all of a sudden there's less, if you're a dude and there's less women eligible, there's less competition in the market for you, then, less dudes, then you're going to reject more of the less desirable and so forth. And so that's the same way.
That's a great analogy, because I think like a lot of folks confuse contract transportation. They think, oh, I'm going to do all of these loads for this amount, but it's really, I'm agreeing to do X amount of loads for this amount, but not a specific one. So
here's the thing, Matt, and you're an attorney. There is no such thing as a contracted load except for a dedicated contract, which we're going to, I think we need to sparse. And this is the thing that's so confusing to people outside the industry, because you hear the term contract and they're like, oh, that means it's confirmed. I'm like, no.
Yeah, we agreed on price at some point.
What's that?
We agreed on price at some point. We didn't agree.
Maybe we did. Maybe we didn't. That's the problem. There's a paper rate is the term that the Chicago brokers like to use, which basically means we have a rate that we've agreed to, but neither party is obligated to that rate. And that's the crazy part, is either party at any moment in time could decide they don't like that rate. So motor carriers could say, screw you, shipper. it's underpriced, and therefore I'm going to demand another $10, $20 a mile to take that same load. And the reason tender rejections work so well is they tell us the truth. They tell us exactly what's happening. It's not load board data, which tends to get skewed with lookups and posts and activity. It is actual transactions in the market. It's electronic tenders. So we look at tenders and they lead spot rates. So tenders should move before spot rates move. And then spot rates should move before contract rates do. And so the first thing we want to see is firming or increasing tender rejection rates. And we are seeing that right now. Now, I have to qualify, this is December. This is the holiday season. Tender rejections always move up during the season. But I think what's interesting about it is that tender rejections this season, this holiday, are doing better than they were last year. Yet volumes were much higher last year. And normally you would expect with lower volumes that rejections would not, if you have lower volumes, rejections would not increase or be higher than they were last year. So what I think is happening, Matt, is that there's just a lot less trucks in the market.
I was going to ask you that.
A lot less competition.
Now, what is driving this capacity kind of leaving? Is it the FMCSA with the new language proficiencies, non-domiciled? Is it something different? Like, where do you think this is being driven from?
Yes, is the answer. All of it. All of it. So it is compliance crackdown, but it's also bankruptcies. I mean, trucking balance sheets have been obliterated over the last 3 years. I mean, most motor carriers, and I talked to a motor carrier yesterday, 400 trucks, mid-size motor carrier, depending on how you would define that. I would call that mid-size. And look, they haven't made money in 2 years. And a lot of these motor carriers, and look, you can go look at the public companies. They publish their earnings. They're required to by the SEC. And even some of the better, higher quality ones, Heartland hasn't made money. I think we're 30 months.
That's crazy. They were the darling of Wall Street forever.
They were, because they were consistently profitable. And I think what's happened is that two things. One is they bought a lot of companies. They bought CFI, Transport America. They bought some of these long haul operators. And that was different because they used to be very conservative in how they didn't grow through acquisition. But I think also there's something shifted in Heartland's business is that they have a policy of not taking freight from freight brokers. It's like it's a hardened policy that a lot of the old asset carriers always had. Many of them have shifted and realized that a lot of the freight is with freight brokers and kind of done that. My understanding is Heartland does not take still today freight from freight brokers. And therefore they're not getting the loads. They're not getting the freight to move their trucks. And therefore they're sort of sitting this round out. And as they're doing that, it's really, really hurt their operating profitability.
I'm going to make sure to take a clip of that segment, Craig, and send it to Heartland so they can confirm with the.
You need to open up for. DAT would love to host you and have you post some capacity, Heartland.
Well, it's interesting because I we both come from this industry, been in this for a minute. The brokers are still relatively new in terms of how they operate. Most
people don't realize it. We're talking the 80s. I mean, it was basic. I had lunch last week with one of the first. He was a C.H. Robinson executive. His name is Mark Walker, sort of a legend. But, it was 1982 when he was working for Robinson on the truck line. Robinson used to own trucks, believe it or not. They were a produce broker, a produce company, a produce broker, hauling what they call exempt freight. So back in the regulated days, certain types of freight in agriculture goods were exempt, were not required to file with not required to file with the ICC, and could basically haul freight, and you could broker freight. But what C.H. Robinson did was they petitioned for the government to allow the use of other types of freight or brokering other types of freight. And C.H. Robinson ended up selling its truck line. I mean, it's interesting because most people who don't know a whole lot about freight or haven't been in it very long, and I think even if you go back to people who joined the industry in 2000, assume that freight brokerage has been with us since trucking was born. And it's actually 40 years old.
Yeah, this is not the right way to characterize brokers, but I think of us as interlopers. They've come in, they've pulled away freight from the dedicated carriers, but they've offered so much efficiency. And I remember an article you wrote a year or so ago about the growth of brokerages and the percentage of freight that they now touch. And it's over 20%, maybe
At
even over
least.
25. That's crazy.
It could be as high as a third. I mean, Triumph told me a while ago that it's as high as 50%. I don't know if that number is correct. I think it's probably closer to a third. But, Evan Armstrong and Associates that puts out a bunch of research tracked it back to the year 2000, and it was 6%. In the year 2018, it was something like 18%. And now it's certainly bigger. I mean, it became a much bigger industry during COVID and after COVID. And the reason is that two things happened during COVID. One is we had this massive capacity crunch, and brokers provide the relief outlet for a lot of shippers, and they performed relatively well. Shippers were able to depend on them for capacity when a lot of the asset carriers were not able to do that. So I think they got to participate in the routing guides that normally they were kind of sort of a secondary option. So that's the first thing. The second thing that freight brokers did is the market corrected, and we had the starting of the freight recession and too much capacity, is the freight brokers decided they wanted to get share, and they didn't want to live the fringes of freight opportunities. They wanted to be the primary opportunity.
Absolutely.
And shippers were very cognizant of inflation. There was a lot of pressure to reduce cost. And freight brokers, unlike an asset-based carriers are very reluctant to do two things. One is to ever lower driver pay because you'll lose your drivers. And the second thing they're always reluctant to do is to lower their rates to their shipper customers, because once they do that, the fear is they'll never get it back.
Absolutely.
So what they'll do is they will basically not, when rates are being lowered, they're not going to go in and offer rate concessions, at least not at first. But freight brokers were willing to do that. They're willing to play the game. And so all of a sudden, these freight brokerages started to pick off a lot of the high volume shippers, where maybe in the background before COVID, they were on the fringes. They were a last option. They were an overhaul option. They weren't in the primary place, but during COVID, they got to participate because of
they answered the phone and they got the freight moved. Exactly.
And they were able to build relationships, but that became an irreversible Trojan. Like, they interloped and disintermediate effectively the asset carriers. And we have never seen, like, the asset carrier model is so broken right now because freight brokers play. And this is the interesting arguments that I always see on X, is that the freight brokerage industry gets a lot of heat. And look, a lot of it's deserved. Like, let's be honest. I was a freight broker. I did all the shenanigans that everybody other freight broker did. I chased rates. 20 years ago, I find ways to not pay attention. Like, I was playing the game like everybody else. Don't hate the player, hate the game. Like, I did all that shenanigans. I know how easy it is. Now, I haven't done that in 20 years, to be clear. There's probably not a lot of truckers that I screwed over when I was a broker, because they're all dead, right? Like, I was talking a long time ago, so don't send me hate mail. But I played the game as much as anybody did. And I think the brokers catch a lot of heat about their practices. And a lot of them are, like, questionably ethical, right? Like, charging detention and not paying it. That's
more margin for the broker.
The broker makes the margin. He's sitting at a desk, doesn't do anything. I mean, I did it in my day. I'm gonna lie. But you're charging for quote unquote deadhead when you're not deadheading. You play these games, and that's how freight brokers, and they get a deservedly bad rep at times. But I think what people don't understand, the motor carriers don't understand, the small guys in particular, don't understand that if it wasn't for freight brokerages, they wouldn't have freight.
Yeah, exactly. It had to happen as you expanded motor carriers and had smaller fleets. They can't go talk to Procter and Gamble and get that freight. They have to work with intermediaries.
Because the larger shippers, I get asked this pretty frequently by small motor carriers. These are small operators, entrepreneurs. They're a couple of years into it maybe, and they're like, "How do I get shipper freight? Teach me how to get shipper freight." And what I tell them is, like, look, you have to understand, when you have 5 trucks, when you are sitting down with 5 trucks or 10 trucks or even 20 trucks, P&G is not going to talk to you. They are not interested in having hundreds of small motor carriers that they have to manage because they have small departments too. There's a finite number of resources that they have available to them in terms of, I'm talking their internal resources.
Yeah.
So they don't have the time to actually manage hundreds or thousands of motor carriers. Even the biggest shippers in the world, like Walmart, don't have tens of thousands of motor carriers. They may have 100 or 200, and then they outsource the rest of it through the freight brokerages. And that's essentially, if you want freight and you're a small operator, you need to make your peace with the freight brokers because they're the reason that you get to exist.
It's interesting because like every company I've seen in the last decade has been pushing this idea of vendor consolidation. I want to have less companies that I have to work with. And on the brokerage side, and you can correct me if I might be wrong, but I've heard that the top 10 brokers represent like 50% of the entire brokerage industry. How much consolidation do we see at the top end versus the fragmentation kind of as we look to the small?
I don't have specific data on that, but that would certainly follow. In the old days, C.H. Robinson, going back again 20 years ago, was something like 1 out of every 8 truckloads in America was dispatched by C.H. Robinson. Like that, they had such substantial scale. And what's interesting is C.H. Robinson's still the largest player in the market. But their relative market share has been eroded. Now they still are big and they've grown, but if you look at the freight brokerage industry as an industry, it has grown much, much faster than C.H. Robinson's own business model. It's the carriers or the brokers are, we just see this massive fragmentation of a lot of brokers. A lot of them were for C.H. Robinson people who went out and started other kinds of companies, or other freight brokers.
Well, it's interesting now. The freight brokers are, they're not going anywhere. They're here for the foreseeable future. And now they're starting to kind of feel the pressure of the liability the trucking folks have been hearing about forever. So,
well, I think I talk a lot about the market, and I think if you sort of like, it's interesting because, you and I are on X. I think most people are on LinkedIn and freight, and there's a much smaller, much more distinguished audience on X than the general LinkedIn audience. Just saying that. I
don't disagree.
It is the place you want to be if you want to be in the conversation. Anyways, what's interesting about these different personalities, and call them influencers, call them thought leaders, whatever you want to call them, that are on social media, call them annoying, like it's fine.
I'm on Reddit, Craig. That's where I'm at.
Okay, well, that's its own problems. But anyway, the reality is that what you find is that every single one of these groups, these people have their own voice and their own thing. And even media circles, like probably the most interesting media company that's not called Freightways is Freight Caviar. And what they have done is they've taken the Morning Brew style of media, of reporting, of not doing a lot of original reporting. And in fact, I talked to Freight Caviar this past week about it. They're not doing a lot of original reporting. That's very expensive, very hard to do original reporting. They're basically taking the social media conversation and the news that companies like Freightways produces and creating it in a very distillable way where the audience can get it without having to go and read and understand the context. And they do it with humor. And I think it's an amazing, amazing business. They've done a great job. But what's interesting about it is when we look at the different various media outlets or personalities in this thing, we all have a slightly different take. You're the legal guy, right, Matt?
I scream about it from time to time.
You provide legal and compliance context that is important. You have a distinct voice, and there is no other Matt Leffler out there, or someone like there is no other source of legal and compliance information that I want to hear from in freight. And I think in freight markets, which is all about the freight economy, then that's the way we've positioned, or I position myself, is to certainly I provide color on other topics. But at the end of the day, my contribution to the freight conversation is all about supply and demand. And that is about the market. Now, that is also called the most contested part of it because I'm often wrong. If you're talking about the market and the direction of the market, you're going to be wrong. And I don't care who we're talking about.
It's like the weather. It changes.
It's easier if you're Jason Miller and you're using data that's 6 months old because then you already have the score. It's like trying to report, talk about the game after the game's been
But
played.
they
when you have
watch the highlight
score.
reels. Should have zigged when they zagged. That was the issue.
So if you're an economist, you're reporting what happened after the fact. Congratulations. Now, my job is harder because I have to be on the front end of analyzing what we think is happening on the ground, what is happening on the ground, and what we think is going to happen. That's a much harder job. So my natural batting average is going to be lower because I don't have the scorecard. So just saying that. But look, I think, Miller does a good job of breaking down these economic data. I don't understand half of what he says, but I do think he does a good job. He does his homework. You have Adamo from the
Our
People's
friends
Empire,
at DAT. You love DAT, Craig.
People's
you love
Empire of DAT. Yeah, you get paid. Every time you say that name, you get paid. Every single time.
You're not wrong. It's
gets
actually by
paid.
the letter. That's why I say DAT as opposed to DAT, because it's by the letter.
3 times. I like the dial a truck thing, man. Like
I love
think
it, man. Well, okay. So what I love about what you do, so you're on the social media and you're phenomenal on social media, but in person, you are electric. You are fantastic. So we had our thing at F3, and then we segued to doing a live debate, which you brought your television crew out to film between you and Adamo. What is it that's different about live events versus the things people see on the internet and all of that?
Well, look, I think this is true of anyone who does public speaking. What's weird to me, my wife, when we go out to cocktail, I hate going to weddings and cocktail receptions. Like the whole, my wife's into philanthropic stuff and every association thing and kids events and all that stuff.
You love a good gala. How could you not love a good gala?
Man, please stop. I can't do it. But my wife's always getting me to go to these things. I'm a natural introvert, which is hard for people to believe. But when I get in front of a topic that I love and you feed off the audience, because one of the things and I know, Matt, you do the same thing. Is if I go into an audience that's flat, an audience that doesn't care, and I give a lot of speeches, and most of the time they're neutral, like the audiences are fine, they're good, but there's every now and then, man, you can just feel it in the room. The energy level is just electric.
Absolutely.
And that is what gets me motivated. And it's like and when you're talking about a topic that you deeply, deeply care about, and I deeply, deeply, deeply care about the trucking industry, because this is my whole life. It's something that I've identified with. I think being in public brings out that energy level, that passion, because especially when you're talking about things you deeply care about, it's so much easier when you have an audience than it is talking into a podcast.
I couldn't agree with you more. I look at it and like the minute I step on stage, whether the room is hot or not, I can begin to feel the energy kind of,
or not.
Yeah, I love walking into a room where the last speaker, everyone's on their phones and they're in their little world. And I'm like, I'm going to put on a show. We're going to have a show.
I that's the best kind, right? Is to wake the audience up, and you woke the audience up at F3.
Oh, we had so much fun. We talked about IEPA. We talked about broker transparency. We talked about autonomous trucks. The new story of the day, which I've been really keyed in on, is broker liability. We were talking about C.H. Robinson. This is the biggest case facing the brokers right now. When can a broker be held responsible for the negligence of a motor carrier? And that question will soon be answered at the United States Supreme Court. Are you excited for this?
I would say that this is the most important thing to happen in the trucking industry in terms of a decision and an impact than in many years. Let me tell you why it's so important. Because if you think about how freight brokers operate, they simply are trying to find the lowest cost provider. That's how they make their money. No judgment. Again, I played the game. I played it well. I was good at it. But the goal is to find the lowest cost operator. So long as you can service the freight, you find the lowest cost operator. That's the game. That's the way you play it. Those are the rules on the field. And you're not supposed to. You're an attorney, so I know you know this, and your audience, people that care about listening to an attorney talk about freight probably know this as well, is that oftentimes freight brokers, in the very first day of orientation, they tell you what to ask. You want plausible deniability.
That's right.
You want to be able to tell an investigator, or in a deposition, heaven forbid that you get to one.
Yeah.
I knew nothing about that carrier's qualifications. I knew that they had compliance. I knew that they had insurance. But I didn't realize that driver had a 2-day training program. I didn't realize that driver had failed his CDL test 15 different times. I didn't realize that driver. And so they want to not know. I didn't realize that driver was out of hours.
Yeah.
I
don't have the ELD. I'm not sure.
How did I know? And the last thing you want to know, I remember at US Express, this gets beat into you in this orientation and in these fleet training programs. But we were told verbatim that if a driver ever said, I'm out of hours, I don't feel well, I'm tired, any of those words, under no terms were we ever supposed to ask him to move the truck.
Exactly.
They were basically safe words where the moment a driver said, I don't feel well, I'm tired, I'm out of hours, your job as a dispatcher, a driver manager, or whatever role, the moment you had knowledge of that, especially if it was in writing, but certainly even people record these things.
Yeah.
If you had knowledge of it, your job was to go find another driver or find a different appointment time for that truck.
That's right.
And that was beat into you because the last thing you want to happen, and there's been case law after case law after case law of motor carrier dispatchers. And I remember this was years ago. I don't even know the case, but I know that you may know the case, decades ago, where a dispatcher encouraged a trucker to drive tired, and the driver ends up killing a family. And in the investigation, the dispatcher was charged as an accessory to whatever,
that's incredible.
Plausible, whatever they call it. What is the legal man? What's the term?
Well, usually going to be liable. You're going to be considered negligent. If it's a criminal thing, then you might be a co-conspirator. But if you are a broker and you actively encourage a motor carrier to do something unsafe, you can be on the hook as basically an agent liability kind of aspect.
So brokers, asset motor carrier dispatchers, driver managers don't ever ask those questions. Like, you don't ask the questions, but the driver volunteers it. You're like, man, I'm kind of
absolutely,
stuck, right?
Absolutely,
because you're told like you do not want to go to jail. And this was like beat into me. This was 20 years ago, and it's got exponentially harder. I mean, this is in the 90s, man. It's got exponentially larger because now these law firms are seeking. You can go. I lived in Texas, and this dude called the Texas Hammer. I hammered the big truckers, is what he says on TV.
Millions of dollars.
I want the Texas Hammer to represent me if I end up in a trucking accident.
It's crazy because you've outlined this perfectly. The big motor carriers, US Express included, they're always dealing with litigation. There's always something going on, whether you're talking about workers' compensation with an injured employee, or you're talking about damaged freight, or you're talking about an accident. And the liability in the old days, a couple $1 million, still a lot of money. But what we're seeing these days is these tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of dollars.
Now, I don't know that I'm supposed to say this, but my dad volunteered it, so I'm gonna say it on stage. There was a court case. This was been maybe 10 years ago, and it was a US Express truck. I think it was Total, actually, was the motor carrier. This was 10 years ago. There were 5 nurses that got killed by one of US Express's, I think it's Total Transportation's truck. Ends up in an accident, and they go into this. So this mock jury thing. Mm-hmm. Like these big court cases, what they'll do, they do this in criminal, they do it in civil. In these big court cases, they will run a trial, and it's the defense that's running it. And the prosecutors do this as well.
Yeah, so plaintiff attorneys absolutely do mock trials. They do more than the defense people do typically.
Okay, so these mock trials are set up to basically give your counsel, the one representing you, a chance to refine their pitch and understand the consequences. Well, they did this over either 1 or 2 mock trials, and the jury, the award was hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah,
it was punitive. And US Express had an insurance policy to $100 million, and anything out of over 100, you had to pay out of pocket.
Yeah.
And so when they realized that, they settled it for 98 million. I don't know why they didn't settle for 100, but they settled it for 98 million. But the truth in that is that when you look at those levels, like tragic accidents, 5 girls died. The attorney on the other side was able to show, or at least demonstrate, that the driver was negligent in some capacity. And And that's the problem. When you have a big motor carrier, Werner's gotten into a big lawsuit.
Yeah.
Wabash Trailer got into one of the largest lawsuits in history for a
That was
trailer
a crazy case.
they manufactured 20 some odd years ago.
That's right. 2004. And the accident happened in 2019.
The driver was drunk, heading the trailer, sitting on the side of the road. Like this stuff is crazy. So, anyways, the big motor carriers and the big companies in the space don't want to have anything that can ever be used against them in the court of law, because you are guilty until proven innocent when it comes into a civil case. It's just the way it works.
Absolutely. Especially if you have the billboard on the side of your trailer. I mean, that is what they see. You got money, you'll be fine.
The Texas hammer is going to hammer the shit out of you. That's just the way it works. So here's the problem. Let's talk about why this is important. Because freight brokers are also in this environment taught to do the same thing that they teach you, except ask no questions and tell no lies. And so when you go into orientation at C.H. Robinson or at Freight Broker X, some of the stuff that they teach you in the first couple of days is do not ask questions, because the moment you have knowledge, you are now putting us at risk and subject to potential liability. Because if the driver volunteers the fact that he's out of hours, he's tired, he's sick, or he doesn't have proper training to haul this load, he can't haul it through the mountains because he's never gone and hauled freight through the mountains. Wyoming, today there was a report of, I think, 60 trailers, truckload trailers that were overturned through high winds in Wyoming.
Oh, wow.
That's a ton a year.
Yeah.
And so if you're a truck driver that comes out of one of these CDL mills out of Illinois and you've never driven in the mountains, much less driven a truck, and you end up in Wyoming with high winds, you may not be able to read the sign and you may not know. And if you were a freight broker that knew that that driver did not have the qualifications or the knowledge to drive across Wyoming, you could be in trouble.
Well, and it kind of goes back to some other stuff we talked about previously, because a motor carrier, small, like 3 or 4 truck fleet, they're probably running the minimum insurance, $750,000. And if they have an accident, they're bankrupt, they're toast the minute that they even have the accident. So the plaintiff's attorneys are looking increasingly at the intermediaries. They're looking at the CHs, the TQs, or the Echoes.
They have all the money.
Absolutely. And
I mean, Matt, you know this. You're an attorney. When you end up getting sued, if you've been in business long enough, you're going to get sued. What the attorney's job on the other end is to find every possible party that they can bring into the lawsuit.
Absolutely.
That they can justify to a judge that that party had something to do with this tort, right? Am I wrong?
You're going to go after the driver, the motor carrier, the broker, the leasing company, maybe try the shipper. Like, you'll go after every single entity.
And what you're hoping for is that you get enough of those firms to say, even if they're not liable, even if there's not a shred of evidence, like even if it went to court, the problem is, like, if you're suing a shipper, that shipper says, hey, it's going to cost us $500,000 to even get into the courtroom with the depositions and prove it. To get a judge to say that we're not liable, we're going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. Let's sell this thing for $50,000.
That's right.
And that's what ends up happening. And the thing right now is that freight brokers are where all the money's at in this industry.
They make at least 40% margin, according to the things I've seen on the internet.
Yeah, well, you don't read everything you see on the internet, especially not X.
That's right. That's right.
People make up a lot of stuff. But the reality is, like, there's so much money, and these plaintiffs' attorneys are looking for places and pockets of cash. The nice thing right now is freight brokers have a federal, under the current standard, federal rule that says they are not liable for what happens to the loads that they brokered over to motor carrier. They're not subject to the liability.
Yeah, let's unpack that a little bit. So what we're talking about is this idea of the broker having a preemption. So there's a thing called F4A that says essentially the broker cannot be held responsible for the negligence because they're doing price, route, and service. That's what they do. What we've seen happen is different federal circuits looking at the same law, the same text, come up with different answers. So on the one hand, they have the 7th Circuit and the 11th Circuit. Those guys say, we don't think brokers are liable. Then you have the 6th and the 9th. They're saying brokers should be liable. And so the C.H. Robinson case, this Montgomery case, is now before the Supreme Court, the 7th Circuit case, where C.H. actually won in the lower court. And now finally, the Supreme Court's going to look at this and say, when, if at all, can a broker be held liable? And most brokers don't even carry insurance for this kind of liability. They don't even think about it. And you're one bad day away from bankruptcy because these cases are tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars.
And the issue is, if you, because of the word, all of the attention around non-domiciled CDLs and CDL mills, if the Supreme Court rules that the F4A law, which is the weirdest law, by the way, because it's the Federal Aviation Administration Authorization Act.
Absolutely.
Like,
it's about
has to do with aviation. And somehow, credit to whoever the lobbyist group that represented the intermediaries, somehow they snuck in an exemption.
It's great to have friends in Congress, I imagine.
But anyways, we're digressing. The fact is, if that gets overturned, if the Supreme Court rules that when it comes to matters of safety, and that's the argument, it's a matter of safety, because it's not an economic argument. Right now, the freight brokerage industry, C.H. Robinson and others, are saying, hey, this is an economic, like, we were given exemption. And what the argument is this purely an economic exemption where the states can't regulate economic, like commerce, is effectively what the argument is? Or is it a safety exemption, which is historically been left up to the states? And here's the crazy part, is when you look at safety rules, there's the federal rules, but that's actually up to the states to enforce on their highway. The government's recourse, if you will, is holding the purse strings to the Department of Transportation. So they have these federal laws, and they expect all states to adhere to it. But their real authority under the Constitution is money. And when they don't get what they want, big bad daddy Duffy says, I ain't giving you any more money.
That's right.
If you don't do what I say you do. And we're seeing this now with the non-domicile CDLs. But here's the problem. If the Supreme Court overturns it and says that is not, in matters of safety, freight brokers can be held liable, then you're going to see the barn door open of every single trucking accident. And I don't know, you would know this. If the Supreme Court rules that this does not consider matters of safety, are we going to see court cases of accidents that happened years ago end up in the court system? I know there's a statute of limitations and a lot of court standings, but are we going to see a situation where maybe there's an accident today that's a catastrophic accident that happened, that a freight broker tendered it 6 months before this ruling? Are we going to see that actually happen?
My feeling, and I could be wrong, my feeling is going to be, if the case has been brought to a final judgment, so there's a case that gets filed and you sue the broker and you get dismissed and it goes to appeal and they deny it, that's probably dead. But for anybody who's involved going forward, or ones that are actively pending now, they're going to stay the proceedings and say, we need clarity. And what is so fascinating, you guys broke this story, and I ended up reading it myself this morning, this brief that was put out by a bunch of attorney generals across the United States. And I'm going to read the states, because I think anyone who has not heard this is going to be just blown away. Arizona, Arkansas, California, Delaware, Idaho, Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Louisiana, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, Montana, Nevada, New Mexico, New York, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Oregon, Rhode Island, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Vermont, Virginia, West Virginia. These are the attorney generals that are saying, we need to have brokers on the hook for liability, because what they're seeing in their own world is their citizens being killed by truck drivers, and then saying that trucker cannot make my citizen whole. Who else is responsible? And I go back to what we've talked about previously. The FMCSA has been so far removed from regulating motor carriers for safety. Now they're stepping in, but brokers are on the hook essentially for being guarantors. That's what the states want. And that's crazy.
Well, but it's crazy, but it's also massively disruptive. And I think if we see a situation, let's play this out. So if the Supreme Court comes out and says, no, we find that Congress was within its rights to exempt, and again, I assume it has to do with the interpretation of the law, not the actual whether Congress is right.
Exactly, absolutely.
And so if the Supreme Court rules that nothing, like freight brokers are exempt, fine, we go about our way, and if you're a freight broker, the we have blue skies and your business model doesn't change. However, if the Supreme Court comes out and rules that you're liable, that is going to be one of the most disruptive and frankly dangerous thing for the freight brokerage industry.
100%.
I think every freight broker in the country, and I got to tell you, like we've been slowly reporting this thing or reporting it. I mean, anybody who's ever dealt with the court system, lawyer man over here knows this because you do this. It's like it takes years. Like just in a normal civil lawsuit can be 4 or 5 years before you even get to a courtroom.
Mm-hmm.
Much less get through all the appeals, which also have their own time, 6 months in some cases, a year. You got to file the appeal, then you have to hear it. Like we're talking in some cases decades before the stuff gets through the entire court system. And there are hundreds, if not thousands of court cases right now involving heavy duty accidents in almost every state in the country, if not all states,
absolutely,
that are in the court system. But here's the thing is if you're a freight broker and all of a sudden we find out that you are liable, then that means every single load that has had an accident of some sort opens you up to liability on which you have no control over. It will bankrupt the vast majority of freight brokers in America because they do not have the systems or the processes to actually mitigate it. And this is one of the counter arguments I heard somebody say is, yes, but they can indemnify. The carrier is indemnifying. And I'm like, brother, these carriers have one truck.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so the motor carrier has indemnified a $100 million broker. Great.
Yeah.
The dude has one truck and $20,000 to his name and $80,000 sitting in Serbia. It ain't gonna matter because when that lawsuit comes out and there's a $50 million payment because Serbian truck driver dude, strong solo Sergey ran illegal. And there's internal emails, broker man is in there bragging about how he got strong solo. Like he's thinking it's funny because we know it happens.
That's right.
They're all talking shit about how they got this driver to take the load and they can't believe he did it. That stuff becomes discoverable. And now we have a massive economic problem for freight brokers because they're going to have to price in the risk, which they can't do.
And they have to buy a new product because if they're not having any type of liability insurance because they never historically thought they needed it, now you have to have it.
And here's the problem with liability insurance is if it becomes retroactive, if under the Supreme Court, and this is something I think we all need to understand is if the Supreme Court says, hey, you as a broker man are now liable, then that means if you've had an accident, the way insurance works is you get a new policy. Insurance company's not going to pay for the stuff that happened in the past.
Yeah, you're going to have to deal with that.
They're going to pay for it going forward.
That's right.
And and so the problem that you end up with as it relates to freight brokerage is that if there's this liability problem, then the way I see it is only the largest freight brokers have the infrastructure to do anything about it.
Exactly.
I mean, I will say this, having gone through a lot of freight, visited a lot of freight floors, and I know C.H. Robinson is being sued, but the larger brokers, for the most part, they're not clean, they're not perfect. They understand this liability was inevitable. They understand that at some point this could overturn it. So they spend a lot of energy on compliance and safety and knowledge. Not perfect, but it's the rest of the market, the freight bros that are not, Freight Bro went out and started his brokerage doing $100 million, buying the what's the car?
G-Wagon or whatever.
G-Wagon, thank you. That guy is screwed because he doesn't have insurance.
I think it's going to be, you're exactly right. I think it's going to be a really interesting thing. That's why I feel in my heart, I think the Seventh Circuit gets upheld. I think SCOTUS goes the route of supporting the brokerage industry more generally. But to your point, if they go the opposite direction, they listen to these 30 some odd state attorney generals and say, we're going to leave the door open for this negligence. What ends up being the case is every single truck accident, you will sue that broker. And even if you went out and proactively bought yourself $5 million of a policy and maybe another 10 million of umbrella, one case and you're done. One case. Done.
I mean, I don't think people realize the kinds of lawsuits that these asset-based carriers pay. I mean, like $98 million is what US Express paid. Like like Warner paid, what was the case that in Texas? It was
that initially was about $100 million. And as they appealed it, the rates of interest continued to increase, and it became closer to like $150 million. Now they ultimately won at the Texas Supreme Court, but they were on the hook for a massive amount. They had $10 million of self-insurance, and then they had an umbrella policy for everything above that. But only a couple of companies on this planet can take a hit of $100 million a year.
I mean,
There
was a case years ago that happened in the state of Georgia. Daimler, it was a Freightliner lawsuit. The brakes failed. The driver lost like a foot. Like it wasn't, they didn't die, but something happened where there was an accident and the driver lost his foot. Wow. $50 million. Not a fatality, a foot. And I'm not dismissing the poor person that lost their foot. I'm not making fun of the fact they don't have a foot. That would suck.
Yeah.
And you feel bad. But is it worth, I mean, I don't know. I might cut off my foot for $50 million. But like,
I'd be open to that. If someone's offering
about is like the amount of money that these asset motor carriers have to pay out in both insurance and in lawsuits. And what we're seeing right now is the largest asset carriers are basically buying insurance that now go up to $300 million because of it.
That's right.
And so this is the problem, is a lot of freight brokers do not actually know how to play in a world where there is actual liability.
Well, I'm with you, because I think it's even more fascinating that you see brokers increasingly build up drop trailer fleets. So you have these big brokerages that are leasing trailers, maintaining trailers, and not realizing, maybe not immediately, the risk that they're creating for themselves. And for the lawyers out there, plaintiff attorneys make one third of that $100 million goes to the lawyer. So I'm in the long line of work. I should be going after the truckers as opposed to helping tell them the story.
Too much, Matt. You might end up on the side of the road in one of these accidents.
That's right.
Like, you know too much. You can't do that.
I need a billboard.
You want to know why you have a Genlogs camera behind you? Let's just be honest. Ryan works for the CIA. He was a CIA operative, which means he's inevitably dirty somehow. Like, he's involved in all this shit. Like, I love Ryan.
He's a good guy, but I don't disagree. I think I'm being monitored. I think I am. I think too much.
I think it's the I don't know who's monitoring. I know if I had it, it would be the ATA. They would be monitoring what I have to say. Actually, they don't have to monitor what I say. I say what I want to say anyways.
Well, the nice thing is, I think, as we're watching the Secretary of Transportation get out in front of these bigger issues about liability and compliance and driver qualification, there seems to be an appetite to make things better. Because the ultimate story of this lawsuit with Montgomery and C.H. Robinson is they're trying to find a way to hold brokers responsible for what the FMCSA should be doing, which is qualifying motor carriers and keeping good data on motor carriers. And if that is the trajectory, I feel good, but I don't know necessarily I feel great yet. Maybe we'll see in a couple of months what happens in Montgomery.
I think the FMCSA, what the DOT specifically, is doing the right things. I think Duffy is focusing on these issues. I mean, we've talked about this, is the abysmal safety record that exists in trucking, the deterioration in the safety quality that exists in trucking. And I'll say this, is every broker is aware of the risk when it comes to theft and cargo theft.
Absolutely.
They are not aware of the safety crisis that is so pervasive right now. And security is a less of an issue compared to safety. Safety is a much more important issue. You think you got problems with security, wait until you can get sued because some driver ends up in an accident. That should keep you up at night. And I think every freight broker in the country, like, I'm not going to, like, I like, if this ruling comes down against the freight brokerage industry, this is bad for my business. It's bad for a lot of businesses in freight tech. It's bad for Genlog's business. It's bad for DAT's business. It's bad for highway. Like, you can list anyone who sells services into freight brokerages, because a lot of our customers are going to contract. We're not going to have as many logos to sell to you.
It might be a benefit for lawyers, though. So there's always a silver lining.
So why is it the lawyers get to win here, Matt? We're supposed to the lawyers, bad guys win. Is that what it is?
The lawyers always win. It just depends on when the winning is described.
They always do, which is got to make you sick. If you've ever been in any kind of legal action, you're like, I'm gonna win. I'm right. The facts are on my side. It doesn't matter. You're still writing checks to your freaking attorneys.
Absolutely. Well, okay, we're getting close on our hour for this
And then one more
conversation.
thing, Matt, about
Yes.
this is even if somehow you get into a court system and you're able to prove that you're not negligent, you're still spending likely $1 million+ because that's what a typical trucking
To
lawsuit
defend
costs.
yourself. Sure.
For a large motor carrier, you're talking a 7-figure legal bill. And there are not a lot of freight brokers that can pay a multitude of 7-figure legal bills and not have that significantly impact their viability.
Well, I think that the part of the growth of the freight brokerage industry specifically was they were able to aggregate capacity at a much lower cost than the big asset-based carriers. And that was the value for a shipper. They have another intermediary between them and potential liability. That's why they don't have a ton of private fleets, though some still do. But if you open the broker up, that cost gets passed on to the customers ultimately. And it means that, I think to your point earlier, it means consolidation of the big players. The big will get bigger, small go away.
My read on this is that the asset-based motor carriers will win. That my read on it is that they have compliance rules, they have systems, they already do this, they know who the drivers are, they know the qualifications. It is the freight brokers that lose, and it's the small operators that lose.
I'm going to be really interested to see if we get an amicus brief from the American Trucking Associations, because the ATA has members that are mostly asset-based, well, all asset-based, but many have brokerages too.
But I think the ATA is always going to side with the motor carrier. Always. I mean, even where they have been, I've come out and pointed out where I disagree with a lot of the ATA's positions. If you look at the ATA, consistently, they're going to protect the assets. And so even though these guys have freight brokerages, I think, look, I came from a trucking family. I got diesel in my blood.
That's right.
And I think ultimately, if you ask even the ones that have large logistics operations, if you ask them about whether they care about the truck or the brokerage business, even if the brokerage business is $1 billion brokerage business and they're making money hand over fist, every single person that has diesel in their blood, and that's a trucker, is going to side with the truck. And you can hear them just complain and bitch and moan about the brokers. That's what they do. It is a favorite pastime at ATA conventions. I've heard it. They absolutely will side with it. So I bet what we'll see is that the ATA and the associations that represent truckers are going to come out. And like I said, I don't want this to happen because it's not good for my business. I sell a lot of data to freight brokers, but it is something that we have to put on our radar, because if it does happen, it's going to be massive consequences for this industry.
I couldn't agree with you more. This is the most important case for brokers right now, is this Montgomery case before SCOTUS. We'll probably have an answer. At least the oral arguments will be sometime middle of next year, I suspect, but we'll probably have a good indication of where they're leaning based on their questions. But I wanted to the last piece is, one of the things you've been talking about is building more in-person events. And I think you guys have some plans for some big in-person things starting next year. What's this all about? What's happening? How do people get involved?
Yeah, so we're going to a road show. I'm a big college football fan. And the most interesting thing to happen in America right now is college football. Like, it is insane. Anyways, I am a fan of the game day show. And we thought it would be cool to take Freightways on a game day style event to these various cities and let the local community, the freight community, celebrate and tell us the story about their community. So we have 4 cities initially identified. We're planning to do 20 over the next year. Nice. Going to Cincinnati, Atlanta, Memphis, and Charlotte. 4 southern cities. That's our southern mid-south tour. Cincinnati's a southern city, by the way. And
it makes sense to me. It does.
Yeah, they got plenty of rednecks up there, so we're good. Anyways, we're going there, and we're going to celebrate the freight industry locally and nationally. So it's going to be filmed. It's going to be streamed. This is a chance for everyone to get out and be a part of the community. Our goal is, one of the things that happens at Freightways events is we get people from all over the country and sometimes all over the world to come to our events. The typical, it's the companies that are quite large, or the senior executives. This is a chance for those mid-market businesses where they're working in the business and not on the business. These CEOs and these executives that may run big businesses, hundreds of millions of billions, may run a really interesting niche business that does 20. That gives us the chance to feature those businesses, both the suppliers and the companies, to talk about what they do for the freight industry. And it's a chance to feature every major freight city in America.
I'm excited for this. I when we first started talking about it, I was like, this is going to resonate so much with all the local traffic clubs or CSTMP folks, because we all love to get together. We love virtual, but man, in person, nothing beats that, man.
Over the years, you know, we do an event in Chattanooga, we've done them in Atlanta, we've done it in Chicago, and I always get these notes every year. Why don't you come to Cincinnati? And there's a big following on X, my boys, the Cincinnati crew. There's, you know, we've been asked to go to Pittsburgh, we've been asked to go to Memphis. This is our chance to take that on the road and really bring out. Our goal is to get a couple hundred people per city that are involved in freight, and really not just the senior leadership, but folks that are maybe in the early parts of their career or middle management that don't have time to come to an event. But you're going to hear about fraud. You're going to hear about these types of issues. I'm sure we'll be talking about this Supreme Court case that's coming up. We're talking about the regulatory environment, talking about freight, talking about all sorts of stuff. But it is a game day style environment. Bring your signs. It's going to be great.
Will there be debates? Because that's what I'm all here for.
We're gonna have debates. I think Adamo and I got to go at it again. Although I did win, so I might need another.
Take that.
He got kind of spanked.
Maybe if we go to Detroit, we can maybe get our mutual friend Professor Miller.
Dr. Jason Miller.
Well,
the good news is, like, all he'll do is tell me I'm wrong because he'll use data that's 6 months old. The good news is, like, you know, at least I'm talking about what's happening right now. We won't know for 6 months until whether he's right or not. So.
We'll circle back. Well, I want to thank you for making time today, Craig. If people don't know you, which I think is silly, but where can they find more about what you're up to?
So I live on X at Freight Alley. I occasionally visit LinkedIn, and I'm
increasingly.
I'm trying to convert all you LinkedIn people over to X because LinkedIn is so bad.
My favorite remains Reddit. I like X. It's very chaotic for me. It's too chaotic for me. X is just very chaotic.
That's what this is. This is just, it matches the industry. Dude, Sean Duffy today so he was asked in the press conference, and he's talking about all this compliance crackdown. And someone in the press asked him if he's concerned about running out of trucks, or is freight going to not move? And he used the word capacity. We have the capacity, which tells me he's an X guy.
I think you're right.
He is in the freight market. He knows nobody's going to bullshit Sean Duffy because he is tuned into what's happening. It is truly, and I mean this sincerely, it is a remarkable thing that we have a DOT secretary that talks about the issues that the industry cares about. And that is very unusual.
No, I couldn't agree with you more.
I've never seen that.
We've seen more activity from this FMCSA and this Secretary of Transportation in the past like 9 months than we've seen from anybody in the last couple of decades.
Here's a crazy stat I was told is the FMCSA has had more has created more what do they call it, actions. What's the term? Come on, lawyer man. What's that?
Like proposed rules? Like they've been going after
when they take an action, when they take an enforcement action.
Yeah, yeah.
They've done more enforcement actions this year than they did in the last 20 combined. That's DOT told me that specifically.
It's incredible. Like they're going after the self-certification of truck driving schools and ELT. Taking a tax on this.
You should be appalled at our industry and what we've done to it. I'm serious.
People don't want to know how the sausage gets made, but once they find out, they're like, "Oh, dude, I didn't know."
The thing that's crazy, Matt, is that most of us, including people who do this every day, didn't even realize a lot of the stuff was happening. And certainly, a lot of times the assumption by a lot of folks on X is that the big motor carriers have got this like secret club where they get together and then talk about how to screw the small drivers. That is not true. I talked to a lot of them, and they have no reason to misrepresent. Even some that are retired, like my brother, who was one of them and now is not one of them. He's building homes. But the reality is they're just so disconnected from the day-to-day underlings of the market and the under happenings of the market, that they are so out of the day-to-day that they don't even realize. Like the word non-domiciled CDLs, when it first came up, I started asking people over the summer, and these are executives that know a ton about trucking. They had never heard the term non-domiciled CDL, even though it was an illegal issue. And then you start talking about CDL mills, and they're appalled. So we can rip on this. You got to invite me back. Can
absolutely.
We need the overtime thing. Would you like when the show ends? You go onto YouTube.
That's right. Well, the thing is, like
Bill Maher.
everyone's so siloed in the industry. Everyone's so siloed to reach out between what shippers and manufacturers feel to what brokers and 3PLs feel to what motor carriers of every size, private, for hire, everything. And when you finally get a holistic view of everything, you go, oh my goodness, how in the world is this sustainable? And like, oh, it isn't. We just haven't tried to fix it yet.
When this non-domicile thing kept trending on X, and I blew it off at first for like a year. I was like, this is not true. Like, this can't be true.
People who are here illegally driving on the CDL, doesn't make any sense.
No,
right.
You can't get a CDL without it being a U.S. citizen. And then you start hearing about the CDL mills, and then you start hearing about the ELD devices that are being hacked. And as I started to hear all these things, I'm like, this is just some crazy trucker conspirator, because there's a lot of them. There's a lot of truck drivers who are into the conspiracies.
I don't disagree with that.
And they all think that they got it all figured out. And I'm like, there's no way this stuff is real. But when you dig into it, you're like, oh my God. And the reason you don't believe it is because like, no one would be this stupid to allow this stuff to take place. But it absolutely is happening. And here's the problem. Brokers have been feeding a lot of this stuff. They've been benefiting from the lack of compliance.
Absolutely.
And if we see a Supreme Court case get ruled where it changes the liability requirements, then all of those past sins, not created by the freight brokers, by the way, created by the ATA, those chickens are going to come home to roost for these guys. And that's scary. It's going to uproot the entire frickin' industry.
Again, I think you're right. I think if this goes the way that, if it goes against the brokers, their entire business model is in jeopardy, because the whole purpose of a broker is an intermediary who does not take custody or control of that freight and is not liable for the actions of the motor carrier. If they become essentially guarantors of the performance of that motor carrier, you are done. Like, it's not sustainable. Big guys can keep doing it. But again, like, the silver lining here, Craig, is that for the lawyers out there, it's going to be a lot of money. And that's great for lawyers.
Oh, come on. I want to double broker some lawyering is what I need to do. You
can't share legal fees with non-lawyers.
We never take money from law firms. We have a rule against taking money from law firms. But you just said something. Maybe because nobody will be able to afford advertising in freight if this ruling gets in, I can just take money from a bunch of lawyers.
I think they would love to give it.
I currently have a rule again. I hate lawyers. No offense. I hate lawyers, and I hate your practice, and I hate what you guys do, and I hate that you follow truck around, and I absolutely hate the Texas Hammer. And we've never taken money from lawyers, but desperate times might call for desperate measures.
This is, you gotta follow the trends and forces that shape the industry, and sometimes it just happens to be some well-dressed lawyers might be the way to go. Well, Craig, I appreciate you.
Not so well-dressed lawyers in the red jacket over there.
It's corduroy. It's very fashionable. This is the time of year.
I think you're secretly a truck stop fan deep down inside, and that's why you have the DAT logo, but that red.
Man, I had the jacket.
If I were DAT's marketing team, I would mandate that you wore blue.
I've told Emily Hafner, who runs that group, I said, if you want to send me a new coat, I'll wear it. But no one sent me a coat.
That is such a missed opportunity, because every time I see a red jacket, I think truck stop.
Well, that's a good place for us to wrap up our conversation. Well, Freight Alley, Craig Fuller, thank you for joining us. I got to say a quick outro. Stick around because we got to let the thing update. But you are the man. Thank you for making time.
Thanks, Matt.
Craig Fuller, Freight Alley himself. You got to get excited about this industry. There's no way you can escape the movement of goods across the United States. Truck driving remains one of the 10 most dangerous jobs in the United States. Safely delivering freight on time and undamaged is difficult, even under the best circumstances. But we have people who are looking to make the industry better, who are amplifying the messages of safety and stopping theft and fraud. Craig Fuller is someone you absolutely have to follow. I will link his X account in the show notes. I like X. It's okay. I'm just not great at it. It's very noisy. But thank you for tuning in. Thanks to DAT. Dat hat is sitting on Dat Bust of Palace, somewhat adjacent to my chamber door. And of course, our friends at Genlogs. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.